Hi class, this is your instructor, Scholar Huff. We're now in chapter 41, the animal body and principles of regulation. When people think of animals, they often think of pets. The animals in the zoo, on a farm, in an aquarium, or those living in the wild. Though this includes a wide variety of animals, most of them would probably be vertebrates, animals with a backbone. These animals barely scratch the surface of the diversity of the animal kingdom, which, in addition to vertebrates, include terrestrial invertebrates, animals without a backbone, such as worms, insects, and spiders, and a variety of marine invertebrates. Despite this great diversity, all of these animals, vertebrates and invertebrates, are built from similar kinds of cells and tissues, such as epithelial cells, pictured in this cross-section of the intestinal tissue. Here, in this chapter, you will explore the basic tissue types and how they are used to form organ systems. And then we will conclude this chapter going into principles involved in the regulation and control of complex functional systems. Most animals have cells that are organized into tissues. Some animals also exhibit higher levels of biological organization, having organs and organ systems. In all animals except the sponges, cells are organized into tissues. A tissue is an aggregate of similar cells and their extracellular matrix from a common embryonic origin organized to perform a specific function. There are four primary tissue types. They are epithelial, connective, muscle, and nerve. True tissues evolved in the lineage that gave rise to the cnidarians and the bilateriates. Cnidarians, which include jellyfish and their relatives, are known as diploblastic, as they develop from two embryonic germ layers, the endoderm and ectoderm. All other animal groups are triploblastic, meaning they exhibit a third embryonic germ layer known as the mesoderm. The presence of a mesoderm allows for the development of more tissue types and helps explain why bilateria are more diverse and complex than the cnidarians. Cnidarians do have mesoglia that lies between the endoderm and the ectoderm. It functions as a hydrostatic skeleton and contains muscle and nerve bundles. Mesoglia might have originated from the mesoderm, as it ranges in complexity from completely acellular to a mix of cells and other materials, and striated muscle arise from the mesodermal cells. These points call into question the placement of triploblasty on the phylogeny. So organs are self-contained structures with discrete borders. They are composed of several types of tissues to form a functional unit. One example is the urinary bladder, which contains muscle tissue, connective tissue, and epithelial tissue. Tubes lined with epithelial tissue connect the bladder to the kidneys, where urine is made. They're referred to as the ureters. An organ system is a group of organs that cooperate to perform the major animal bodily functions. For example, the urinary system is composed of the kidneys, the urinary bladders, the ureters, the urethra, and blood vessels. These organs cooperate to produce urine and release it from the body. Epithelial tissues provide critical functions such as protection, secretion, and absorption. They line body cavities and organs. They comprise the outer surface of bodies, such as your skin, and the primary tissues found in glands, and allow the movement of substances into and out of bodies or organs. Epithelial tissues can arise from all three embryonic germ layers, the endoderm, the mesoderm, and the ectoderm. For example, the gastrodermis in a jellyfish is an epithelial tissue originating from the endoderm. The gastrodermis functions in absorption of nutrients. In vertebrates, the epidermis of the skin arises from the ectoderm, whereas the epithelial lining of blood vessels is of mesodermal origin. And note, I will not be asking you all from what that comes from, i.e., does it arise from this or does it arise from that, referring to the ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm. Epithelial tissues are arranged into sheets of cells with little or no extracellular material. The epithelial cell membranes have three regions or domains that differ in structure and function: apical, lateral, and basal. This feature called membrane polarity. The apical surface is a free surface which either faces the external surface of an animal, the skin, for example, or faces internally into the lumen of tube-like blood vessels and the digestive tract. Apical surfaces sometimes show membrane specializations on the top of its surface, and the apical surface of cells lining the small intestines have finger-shaped protrusions called microvilli, and they greatly increase the amount of membrane for absorption, or they greatly increase the surface area to allow absorption to be quite efficient, as you see here on the right-hand side of your screen. Lateral surfaces are sites where adjacent cells interconnect by way of adhesive structures called tight junctions and desmosomes, forming tightly packed continuous cells, which you're seeing here at 41.4a. The basement membrane is a very thin, delicate layer made of tiny protein fibers and glycoproteins produced by the epithelial cells, which functions to anchor the epithelium to the underlying connective tissue. Epithelial tissues do not contain blood vessels. They are avascular. Connective tissues are usually highly vascular, so nearby connective tissue can provide the essential nutrients to the epithelial tissues, as you can see here. Oxygen and nutrients can diffuse from the blood vessels across the basement membrane into the epithelial cells. Carbon dioxide can diffuse out of epithelial cells, crossing the basement membrane to enter the bloodstream. Diffusion is enhanced by the presence of specialized connections between epithelial cells called gap junctions. Even with gap junctions, diffusion is effectively only for a few cell layers, which limits the thickness of most epithelial layers as a result of their physical contact with the outside world, such as your skin, and internal environment, blood vessels, and the digestive tract. Epithelial cells have a high rate of mitosis, allowing rapid repair of damaged tissue. Histologically, epithelial tissues are classified based upon the number of cell layers and shapes. Table 41.1 reveals this remarkably diversity in vertebrates. A simple epithelium is one cell layer thick. That means all cells are attached to the basement membrane and have an apical end. A stratified epithelium is two or more layers thick, where one layer is attached to the basement membrane, and one layer opens to the lumen or the outside, with a layer or more between. Pseudostratified epithelia look like they are stratified, but they're actually a single layer where cells are attached to the basement membrane, and only some of them reach the free surface. Cuboidal cells are about as tall as they are wide, shaped like a cube. Kidney tubules are lined with cuboidal cells. Columnar cells are taller than they are wide, shaped like a column. And simple columnar epithelium is found in the intestines. Squamous cells are flat and have irregular shape. They're thin, flattened cells. Simple squamous epithelium is found in the linings of the gas exchange surfaces of the lungs and blood capillaries. Simple epithelia are built for rapid, efficient diffusion of gases, nutrients, and water. Stratified squamous epithelium is found in the epidermis of the skin of many vertebrates, where outer layers are filled with the protein keratin, providing a protective barrier. Pseudostratified columnar epithelium is found in parts of the vertebrate respiratory tract. Glands or glandular epithelium are next. Glands are composed of epithelial cells to produce metabolic products and secrete them into ducts or bodily fluids, including blood. Glands can be unicellular, such as the goblet cells that secrete mucus into the digestive and respiratory tracts, and most glands are multicellular organs and are classified based on their method of secretion. Exocrine glands secrete products through ducts. directly to the intended target. Examples include salivary glands and sweat glands. Endocrine glands secrete products into the blood for transport to the destination. Hence, endocrine glands are ductless. These can be small organs, such as the thyroid and the pituitary. Larger endocrine glands include the liver, pancreas, and adrenal glands. Connective tissues are the most diverse and abundant tissues in an animal body. As the name implies, they connect and give support to all other tissues in the body. They arise from the mesoderm in triploblastic animals. The cells in most connective tissues are not in contact with each other, and they are supported by a vast amount of extracellular material called the extracellular matrix, or matrix. The matrix contains protein fibers, a ground substance of other molecules, and often liquid. The gelatinous mesoglia found in diploblastic animals is strikingly similar to the structure and function to connective tissues. So I'll now begin with special types of connective tissue. Excuse me. Loose connective tissue consists of cells scattered within a matrix and contains large amounts of ground substance. This gelatinous material is strengthened by a loose scattering of protein fibers such as collagen, which supports the tissue by forming a meshwork, elastin, which makes the tissue elastic, and then reticulin, which helps support the network of collagen. Now I'm at adipose. Adipose cells, more commonly termed fat cells, are important for nutrient storage. In certain areas of the body, including under the skin, in bone marrow, and around kidneys, these cells develop into large groups forming adipose tissue. Each adipose cell contains a droplet of fat or triglycerides within a storage vesicle. When needed for energy, the adipose cell hydrolyzes its stored triglycerides and secretes fatty acids into the blood for oxidation by the cells of the muscles, liver, or other organs. Adipose cells cannot divide. The number of adipose cells in an adult is generally fixed. When a person gains weight, the cell becomes larger. When weight is lost, the cells shrink. Nuclei stain a dark black toward the periphery of the adipocyte, or adipose cell. Cartilage is a specialized connective tissue that is firm and flexible and does not stretch. It is far tougher than loose or dense connective tissue. It has great tensile strength. The ground substance of cartilage forms from a characteristic type of glycoprotein called chondroitin. Chondroitin is thought to have evolved before the split between cnidarians and bladderwrights, and is thus found in a variety of animals. Cartilage is considered to be immature or mature, called hyaline, depending on the presence of various protein fibers such as collagen. Vertebrate hyaline cartilage is densely packed with collagen arranged in a parallel fashion. Cartilage makes up the entire skeletal system of the cartilaginous fishes and agnathans. In most adult vertebrates, however, cartilage is restricted to the joint surfaces of bones to form freely movable joints and certain other locations. In humans, for example, the tip of the nose, the outer ear, the intervertebral discs of the backbone, the larynx, and a few other structures are composed of cartilage. Cartilage cells, or chondrocytes, lie within lacunae, within cartilage ground substance. And yes, your text says live within spaces. I said lie within, rather than live within spaces. The cells remain alive even though there are no blood vessels within the cartilage matrix. They receive oxygen and nutrients by diffusion through the cartilage ground substance from the surrounding blood vessels. This diffusion can occur only because the cartilage matrix is well hydrated and not calcified as in bone. Bone is unique to vertebrate animals. In bone, the matrix is composed of calcium phosphate crystals. Some other animal groups employ calcium carbonate to form rigid structures. Bone cells, called osteocytes, remain alive even though the extracellular matrix becomes hardened with calcium phosphate crystals. Bone is vascularized. Blood vessels travel through the central canals or osteon canals into the bone, providing nutrients or removing wastes. Osteocytes extend cytoplasmic processes toward neighboring osteocytes through canaliculi. And remember now, osteocytes also lie in lacunae. Osteocytes communicate with blood vessels using the canaliculi. Bone is described in more detail in the 45th chapter, which I'll lean on as I continue teaching. Blood is classified as connective tissue because it contains an abundant extracellular material, the fluid called plasma. It differs from other connective tissues in that many plasma proteins are produced by blood cells. The cells of blood are called erythrocytes for red blood cells, or even rubrocytes, and leukocytes for white blood cells, and then the platelets, which are referred to as thrombocytes. Thrombocytes are fragments of a type of bone marrow, and blood is discussed a bit more in chapter 48, which I will lean on throughout this lecture to continue teaching about bone, not to mention blood. So bone is more so in 45, the chapter. Blood is more so in chapter 48. Muscle tissue is characterized by the ability to generate a force by converting chemical energy into mechanical energy. I'll say contraction. Presence of muscle tissue is one of the hallmarks of the metazoans, the true animals. Muscle tissue affords internally initiated movement and behavior, thereby distinguishing animals from the other multicellular organisms, plants, fungi, and some protists. Myosin, one of the contractile proteins in muscle tissue, appears to have first evolved in sponges, where it seems to play a role in water flow regulation. Most animal muscle is either smooth or striated. These names are derived from their appearance under a microscope. Smooth muscle, which is the first type to have evolved, has a homogeneous smooth appearance. Striated muscle appears to be striped due to the highly organized arrangement of protein fibers, actin and myosin. The presence of organized protein fibers allowed for the complex movements requiring greater nervous system control and the generation of faster movements and considerably greater forces than smooth muscle produces. Cardiac muscle, the last type to evolve, is found only in vertebrate hearts. It is also striated. Smooth muscle is seen in internal organs or viscera. Smooth muscle is arranged into sheets of long spindle-shaped cells, each cell containing a single nucleus. In some tissues, the cells contract only when a nerve stimulates them, and all of the cells in the sheet contract as a unit. In vertebrates, muscle of this type line the walls of many blood vessels and make up the iris of the eye, which contracts in bright light. In other smooth muscle, such as those of the wall of the digestive tract, muscle cells themselves may spontaneously initiate electrical impulses, leading to a slow, steady contraction of the tissue. Here, nerves regulate rather than initiate the activity. Skeletal muscle is homologous to striated muscle in other mammals. It is under voluntary control and functions in locomotion. Skeletal muscles are long, tubular cells, or usually called fibers rather than cells. Skeletal muscle fibers are produced during the development by the fusion of several cells end to end. So skeletal muscle is multinucleate, i.e., mature muscle fibers contain many nuclei. And I'll teach more of this as well. And it can be found in chapter 45. The hearts of vertebrates are made up of striated muscle cells arranged very differently from the fibers of skeletal muscle. Instead of having very long multinucleate cells running the length of the muscle, Cardiac muscle consists of smaller interconnected cells with a single nucleus. The interconnections between adjacent cells appear under the microscope as dark lines called intercalated discs. In reality, these lines are regions where gap junctions link adjacent muscle cells. Gap junctions have openings that permit movement of small substances and ions. These interconnections enable the cardiac muscle cells to form a single functioning unit. It contracts the syncytium. It does. Certain specialized cardiac muscle cells can generate electrical impulses spontaneously, but the nervous system usually regulates the rate of impulse activity. The impulses generated by the specialized cell groups spread across the gap junctions from cell to cell, synchronizing the heart's contraction. And this is more so found in chapter 48. Nerve tissue is composed of neurons and their supporting cells called neuroglia, or glial cells. Neurons are specialized to produce and conduct electrochemical events or impulses. Nerve tissue co-evolved with muscle and organ systems as a means of control and regulation. Most neurons consist of three parts: the cell body, dendrites, and an axon. The cell body of a neuron contains the nucleus. Dendrites are thin, highly branched extensions that receive incoming stimulation and conduct electrical impulses to the cell body. The axon is a single extension of the cytoplasm that conducts impulses away from the cell body. Most axons and dendrites can be measured in millimeters, but some can be quite long. For example, cell bodies of neurons that control the muscles in your feet lie in the spinal cord. Therefore, their axons may extend over a meter. Neuroglia, or glial cells, do not conduct impulses. They function to lend support, aid in nourishment, and provide protection for neurons. They also are instrumental in the regulation of neurotransmission. This is discussed more so in chapter 42, which I may lean on just a bit. This is a typical multipolar neuron. So we have organ systems, and they'll be grouped as communication and integration, support and movement, regulation and maintenance, defense and reproduction and development. First up is the nervous system, which contains the brain, spinal cord, nerves, and sensory organs. It detects internal sensory feedback and external stimuli such as light, sound, and touch. The information is collected and then integrated, then the appropriate response is made. The sensory systems are a subset of the nervous system. So it aids with external stimuli such as vision, hearing, smell, and so on. Working in parallel with the nervous system is the endocrine system, which issues chemical signals that regulate and fine-tune a myriad of chemical processes that take place. Next up, we get the musculoskeletal system. It includes two interrelated systems. So muscles are most obviously responsible for movement, and the skeletal system is that rigid framework against which most muscles pull. So vertebrates have internal skeletons. Many other animals exhibit external skeletons, such as the insects, or even hydrostatic skeletons. So next up, with regulation and maintenance, we begin with the digestive system. We eat, absorb nutrients, and eliminate solid wastes. The heart and vessels of the circulatory system pump and distribute blood, including carrying nutrients and other substances throughout the body. The body requires oxygen and expels carbon dioxide via the respiratory system. And finally, vertebrates tightly regulate the concentration of their bodily fluids. These osmoregulatory processes, which are largely carried out by the urinary system. So sometimes the defense is needed. Every animal faces the assault by bacteria, viruses, fungi, protists, and even other animals. So given that, We rely on the integumentary system as being that first line of defense, intact skin being that first line. So if they penetrate that first line of defense, nextly will be the immune system. It responds by producing antibodies and specialized cells that attack those invading organisms. The biological continuity of vertebrates is the province of the reproductive system. The male and female reproductive system consists of organs where gametes develop, as well as glands and tubes that nurture gametes and allow gametes of the complementary sexes to come in contact with one another. That is a brief review of the organ systems. Animals have evolved body structure, has become increasingly specialized. Each cell is a sophisticated machine, finely tuned to carry out a precise role within the body. Such specialization of cell function is possible only when cellular conditions stay within narrow limits. Temperature, pH, the concentrations of glucose and oxygen, and many other factors must remain relatively constant for cells to function efficiently and interact properly with one another. The dynamic constancy of the internal environment is called homeostasis. The term dynamic is used because conditions are never constant, but fluctuate continuously within narrow limits. Homeostasis is essential for life, and most of the regulatory mechanisms of the vertebrate body are involved with maintaining homeostasis. One way organisms maintain internal consistency is to use control systems that are limited by negative feedback. Negative feedback is a common biochemical mechanism where the result of a process feeds back to limit the process. Physiologically, this requires internal and external sensors, which can either be cells or membrane receptors. When conditions exceed a set point, biochemical reactions are initiated to move the condition back toward the set point. The human body has set points for body temperature, glucose concentration, electrolyte or ion concentration, the tension on a tendon, and so on. The integrating center is often a particular region of the brain or spinal cord, but in some cases it can also be cells of the endocrine glands. When a deviation in a condition occurs, a message is sent to increase or decrease the activity of a particular target organs, termed effectors. Effectors are generally muscles or glands, and their actions can change the value of the condition in question back toward the set point value. Mammals and birds are endothermic. They maintain relatively constant body temperatures independent of the environment. In humans, when the body temperature exceeds 98.6 degrees, neurons in part of the brain called the hypothalamus detect the temperature change. Acting through the control of the motor neurons, the hypothalamus responds by promoting the dissipation of heat through sweating, dilation of blood vessels in the skin, and other mechanisms. These responses tend to counteract the rise in body temperature. Positive feedback. Now, positive feedback. And as it states, negative feedback mechanisms, they often oppose each other to produce a final degree of control. In a few cases, the body uses positive feedback mechanisms, which instead of counteracting a change, push or accentuate a change farther in the same direction, or further from, I'll say, homeostasis. In a positive feedback loop, the effector drives the value of the controlled variable even farther from the set point. As a result, systems in which there is positive feedback are highly unstable, analogous to a spark that ignites an explosion. They do not help homeostasis. Nevertheless, such systems are important components of some physiological mechanisms. For example, positive feedback occurs in blood clotting, in which one clotting factor activates another in a cascade that leads quickly to the formation of a clot. Positive feedback also plays a role in the contractions of the uterus during childbirth. In this case, stretching of the uterus by the fetus stimulates contraction, and contraction causes further stretching. The cycle continues until the uterus expels the fetus. In the body, most positive feedback systems act as part of some larger mechanism that maintains homeostasis. In the examples we've described, formation of a blood clot stops bleeding and therefore tends to keep blood volume constant. An expulsion of the fetus reduces the contractions of the uterus, stopping the cycle. Regulating body temperature. Temperature is one of the most important aspects of the environment. Some organisms have a body temperature that conforms to the environment, and other organisms regulate their body temperature. Briefly here, for many years, physiologists have classified organisms according to whether they maintained a constant body temperature or their body temperature fluctuated with the environment. Animals that regulate their body temperature about a set point are called homeotherms, and those that allow their body temperature to conform to the environment are called poikilotherms. Because homeotherms tended to maintain their body temperature above the ambient temperature, they were colloquially called warm-blooded. Poikilotherms were termed cold-blooded. The problem with this terminology is that poikilotherm in an environment with a stable temperature, for example, many deep-sea fish species, has a more constant body temperature than homeotherms. These limitations to the dichotomy based on temperature relation led to another view based on how body temperature is generated. Animals that use metabolism to generate body heat and maintain the temperatures above the ambient temperature are called endotherms. Animals with a relatively low metabolic rate that do not use metabolism to produce heat are called ectotherms. Endotherms tend to have lower thermal conductivity due to insulating mechanisms, and ectotherms tend to have higher thermal conductivity and lack insulation. And one thing I may need to mention is radiation, which is the transfer of heat by electromagnetic radiation, radiation from the sun. Conduction is a direct transfer of heat from a hotter object to a colder one. There you have it. That is conduction. And then convection is transfer of heat brought about by the movement of a gas or a liquid. Convection. And then evaporation is heat of vaporization, or the amount of energy needed to change them from a liquid to a gas. And then lastly, your book provides to you all the term You may need to review this for homeostasis class by way of negative feedback. Please review this. Though I'm going to the last part, and this should also be reviewed. It doesn't list it here. Oh boy. Well, your textbook ends this on page 921 in chapter 41. It's called a fever. Pyrogens are what causes a fever. And please do review that. And if you heard of torpor, this is also on that same page, page 921. And it's by way of the endotherm that can reduce their metabolic rate. And the body temperature can produce a state of dormancy called torpor. And torpor allows the animal to reduce the need for food intake by reducing metabolism. Some birds, such as the hummingbird, allow the temperature to drop as low as 25 degrees Celsius at night. So very large animals do not hibernate. It was long thought that bears hibernate, but in reality, their temperature is reduced only a few degrees. They instead undergo a prolonged winter sleep. With their thermal mass and low rate of heat loss, they do not seem to require additional energy savings of hibernation. So occasionally in the southern United States, temperatures can get cold enough to freeze water, and alligators that live in the waters can enter brumation. During brumation, alligators make sure to keep their noses above the surface so they can breathe. That is torpor in alligators. So this has been your instructor, Scholar Huff. Thank you all for listening.